All right, everyone, welcome back to the Insights of All Trades podcast. I have an episode today that was near and dear to my heart, is with my good friend Pankil Chander. We wrestled together at Wilkes. He was in the captain's role when I first got here, and he inspired me a lot, not just on the wrestling bat, but even more so just kind of how I approach life, really, how I approach leadership and so on. And he has a lot of coaching experience. He is an assistant wrestling coach now at Springfield College, which is a top-tier Division III team, but he has previous coaching experience at Gettysburg College and at a Division I program in Central PA at Wilkes University. He's also a master's degree candidate for athletic administration as well at Springfield College. So he tackles leadership from, as formally as a master's program and as informally as, he went through the trenches, right, as a wrestler and as a captain, as a coach. So he has a very unique take, not just on wrestling, but how to approach leadership, which I think goes above and beyond just what it means to be a wrestling coach and so on. So regardless of whether you're a wrestler or not, I think the way we discuss wrestling in this podcast is a lot more through the lens of being a leader, being a fighter, and whatever it is that you're doing. We talk about identity and so on. I think it transcends wrestling. But before we get into the podcast, we are sponsored by Rigging It Gear. So I'm filming this intro right now in the beginning of May. Jacob Younger's Kickstarter for Rigging It Gear will be launching on May 14th for his fanny packs. So we got a full line made. If you aren't watching the video, I'll try to describe it to you, but I do have pretty much the up-to-date iteration with me here. What makes it unique, besides just being high-quality material and lightweight, some other high-quality fanny packs you could buy, is that this has a patent-pending rail system on the outside. So there's like a lining around the outside of the fanny pack that allows you to attach it to, it could be the head of your backpack, so it gives you a brain of the backpack. You could attach it to your handlebars on a bike, or the actual, I'm not a cyclist, I don't know the terms for cycling, but the actual frame of the bike. You could attach, essentially whatever you want to the outside of the rail system. So provided that everything goes well on that, we're pretty sure that he'll be launching another Kickstarter for his full modular backpacking system then. So got a little foreshadowing there. We're hoping to get Younger on the podcast this week, so that way we can kind of talk about everything that's happened since his first episode on the Insights of All Trades podcast, where he talked about, kind of making his own gear and using that to through hike the AT, and everything he's been doing with Rigging It Gear over the past couple years. It's certainly up and running now, but we're hoping the Kickstarter launches him from, a mom and pop company, for lack of a better word, or lack of a better phrase rather, and maybe launch him into the mainstream. So that'd be pretty sweet. Stay tuned for that. But yeah, without further ado, here's a podcast with my good friend Pankil Chander. Welcome to Insights of All Trades podcast with Nick and Cole. This is where we talk with people we meet along our journeys through medicine, military service, sports, education, and beyond. We hope you enjoy. All right, we are rolling. I'm here with my good friend Pankil Chander. Pankil, what's up, man?
Oh, what's up, brother? Thanks for having me on.
Of course, dude. So you're a man who wears many different hats, but when I think of you, I think about us wrestling together at Wilkes. So I think you were a junior when I came here as a freshman. I think so. And you're kind of right. You were in a leadership role from the day I walked on campus. They're like the scary 141 pounder that would beat the crap out of you during practice. And at that time, I was smaller. I wrestled 149. Didn't really cut much weight for 149. So I wrestled with you a lot, when I came to Wilkes, and you kicked my butt a whole heck of a lot too. So, but before we kind of let the conversation flow and what have you, just to make sure I don't do you a huge disservice with the many hats you wear. I know you're coaching in college now. Could you give me like the bullet point overview of, the day in the life of Pank?
Yeah, thanks, man, and I appreciate you calling me Pank. I feel like I haven't heard that nickname since the Wilkes days. I was always
I'm sad
growing
it
up.
died off.
Yeah, no, it's still there, and it's sparse though. I get a bunch of nicknames just because my name is unique in that way. So it's always easier for people to refer to me as with a nickname. But no, yeah. So I'm at Springfield College right now in Western Massachusetts. I've been here since kind of virtually since June, and then obviously on campus since August. And it's been obviously a challenging year for everyone. But here I'm an assistant coach. I'm in graduate school in the athletic administration graduate program at Springfield, and then I also serve as a teaching fellow in the physical education and health education department at Springfield. So I do wear what they call them at Springfield is kind of the teacher coach model, and so a lot of the coaches, especially the head coaches, are our faculty on campus, and then a lot of the assistants, the graduate assistants are teaching fellows. So so that could mean, teaching a half credit physical education activity course, or a 1 credit course, or maybe even a 2 or 3 credit course, depending on, kind of your level of, your competence in being able to teach those courses. So I've been coaching here for the last year, and it's been great. Despite all the challenges, we've been able to train pretty consistently and get on the mat. And unfortunately, didn't have any competition, but it's been a productive year with the way we've been able to train and still lift and have that time together as a team. Because obviously at this time last year, no one was on campus, and we didn't really have a lot of access to consistent training or the weight room or anything like that. So it's good to being able to connect with people in person on a consistent basis, and that's kind of what we've been doing last year or so.
Great. So from my limited understanding before we started rolling, based off of what you were explaining, was that Springfield's kind of like the mecca nationally in terms of strength and conditioning / sports related programs, meaning that what I assume is like the graduate level, right?
Yeah. I would say undergrad and graduate. I mean, I wouldn't say that we're it's not like every ranking or accreditation body you look at, you're going to see Springfield on all these, platforms. But when you look at the alumni network and kind of the path that all these alumni have been on through, anything in sport or human and movement sciences, Springfield really shines. That's kind of our strengths academically, and so anything from sport management to sport and exercise psychology, athletic counseling. Physical education is obviously a huge one. And then, exercise science, we have a movement studies major, we have coaching minors, we have a nutrition minor, and then obviously a lot of graduate programs that are really conducive to, developing coaches, developing administrators, developing teachers. So anything in the sport performance field, if you're looking to be in that, realm, it's going to be hard to find a better place to do it than Springfield College. Obviously, there's a lot of great institutions that offer those programs, but Springfield is certainly unique in the sense of its history and the alumni that have been through the program and or different programs on campus. So it's definitely, it was a great fit for me because of those reasons. With a really competitive Division III program, a lot of history rooted in, kind of like Wilkes. I know we had a lot of alumni come back and speak to us, and Wilkes is probably one of the oldest programs. It is one of the oldest programs in the country, and so Springfield is even older than Wilkes' program, actually. So we're I think in our 106th or 7th year as a program, and over 1,000 dual meet wins, and that's primarily because they've been in place for so long. It's like top 5 dual meet wins amongst all divisions. So and so I think the list is like it's like Iowa State, Oregon State, Oklahoma State, Iowa, and then it's like Springfield. Not in that order, but I believe those are the schools in the top 5 amongst all time dual meet wins. So it's pretty cool. There's a lot of cool history. Jeff Blatnick is a Olympic champ out of Springfield, and he was a 1984 Olympic champ in Greco-Roman wrestling. So, so a lot of cool sports history, rooted out of Springfield for sure.
Dang, I feel like a bad historian now in terms of wrestling. Normally when people like hear about Wilkes Wrestling, I'm like, yeah, we have like the Rose Bowl of wrestling at the Wilkes Open, which you won, by the way. I didn't plan to keep that in my back pocket for this. But this man took out probably who knows how many people to win the Wilkes Open. But this was like a tournament that we hosted while at one point we were a D1 program, and our invite list for this tournament, despite now being D3, is predominantly Division I schools and some tough D3 teams as well. But might as well be a Division I tournament.
Yeah,
and it's a tough tournament. I, for one, have never been on the medal stand. You've been on the top of it, which is pretty crazy. But yeah, anyway, so you're on the tail end of graduate school at Springfield. Do you think you'll have some longevity at Springfield College in terms of staying there after school to coach?
Yeah, so I'll have plan on kind of being done with that master's it'd be next spring, so it would be May 2022. That would kind of be the plan, and but yeah, I do plan on continuing to coach, and obviously there's there's different paths to continue with school. Obviously, I'm not married to any of those ideas. I think you got to be really committed. I mean, Cole, as you know, you're getting your Pharm D, right? So that's a huge commitment school wise, right, to get any sort of terminal degree in your field. And I think that's really one of the cool things about Springfield is that despite all of the the kind of graduate programs and the experiences that we get as coaches, school, the rigor academically with research is, it could be, anything is what you make of it, right? But the rigor academically could be pretty challenging if you're doing a challenging research topic, or maybe trying to fill a gap in sport research that's never been done before. So that's something that they really push on us as grad students, right? Is to make sure that we're doing research and we're doing great work in that research. So that's been something that I found value in as you become a better thinker through that through being kind of engaged in research and writing. And so obviously I've learned a lot about different facets of the industry through it, and so those are things kind of like that people maybe tend to enjoy, and they're like, oh, I want to do more of it and get that terminal degree and go that PhD route, right? And again, my intent is to coach, but again, I think anything could happen. I don't write off any ideas, but right now in the short term, it's get the master's and continue to coach, and so Springfield has a long history in having a really successful athletic administration graduate program. A lot of great alumni come out of there and are working in every level of college athletics you could think of. So, but it's I want to go back to your point when you're talking about kind of the history. Wilkes Wrestling. Wilkes Wrestling's history is incredible, right? It's not like not comparing the histories. It's more just both. It's kind of the cool thing about some of the places I've been at. It's like the history is so rich in wrestling. Wilkes Wrestling history. Obviously I'm biased, is the best athletic history on Wilkes' campus. I don't think many people on Wilkes' campus will argue that, right? There's no richer and more successful tradition at Wilkes University than Wilkes Wrestling. So I've always been really proud of that tradition, just kind of being in that northeast pocket of Pennsylvania, and then being on teams with guys like yourself and guys from the Lehigh Valley, and just all these really incredible wrestling areas that I got to learn from you guys, and got to learn about kind of makes Pennsylvania wrestling the mecca. We talk about Springfield being the strength and conditioning mecca. There's no arguing that Pennsylvania wrestling is the mecca of wrestling. So I think that was really just a really cool part about my experience there. That I got to learn so much about Pennsylvania wrestling and be around guys, and and then even Coach Laudenslager, right, one of the best mentors and coaches out there. So he's a District 11 guy, and just how he is, right? High expectations. He's tough, and he expects he expects the most out of you. So that was something, having a coach like that who had been in, arguably the best wrestling district in the country, right? I guess it depends on who you talk to. I know the Whitfield out in Western PA is, pretty, maybe more competitive than District 11. I don't know. I guess it depends on the year, but I know we were on a lot of great wrestlers on Wilkes' team that came through, that District 11 pocket. So yeah, so a lot of rich tradition all around for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure this is probably like the third or fourth time that Pennsylvania wrestling has come up on this podcast. I'll try not to be a religious zealot this time about talking about Pennsylvania wrestling is like higher caliber than everyone else. And then my New Jersey friends will get mad at me, but like, I don't know, man, Jersey's right there. It's PA. They think they're better. I think they're out of their mind, but that's okay. I'll digress. But yeah, I agree. Speaking of Schlager in particular, just because outside of I think the only other teammate I've had on this podcast thus far was Mustafa, who I guess you would have been graduated when Mustafa came in, so I guess you didn't get to wrestle with him. We didn't focus too much on wrestling, but even then, it's just as soon as you talk about Wilkes Wrestling, you're like, and we wrestle under the man, John Lawton Schlager. And I'm curious, talking about Schlager, what attributes as a coach, or maybe just as a man, you kind of took after Wilkes moving forward. And you don't even have to say based off of Schlager's leadership alone, but kind of just your Wilkes Wrestling experience. How does that carry forward into your, 4 years plus now coaching at the collegiate level? Because I think you were
rounding out year 4. Yeah, right. Just finishing up year 4. Yep.
Right.
No, that's a great question, and so multifaceted, right? Because I mean, my Wilkes Wrestling experience was kind of everything, to me. I mean, I know, was on a team with a lot of great guys, and maybe for some of the guys on the team, it was, it was obviously a lot to them, but maybe for some it was, it's kind of like a phase in their life. And then, they go on and have great careers, and that's great too. And for me, I was like, man, this is really kind of my space where I want to continue to be in, and so for me, it started with the recruiting process, right? Like the way Lawton Schlager recruited me, and he was much different than any coach I'd ever maybe interacted with in the past. He wasn't your typical yell at you and in your face wrestling coach. We're kind of used to being around, and he's kind of stoic in his approach, and I think I needed that. I was probably like a really anxious kid, and it was always very kind of hyper about everything. Maybe had a little bit of anxiety about things, and it was just very, very intense in my own way. And his kind of approach was very much like maybe what I needed to make sure that I was level headed and understood how to compose my emotions when I'm competing, those kinds of things, right? But it did start with the recruiting process. I felt like he had my best interest in mind when I was getting recruited, and that he cared, and then so obviously when I stepped foot on campus, it was things financially worked out. That was a big factor, and it was close enough to home where I could kind of be independent, but far enough where I could be independent, but close enough that I could kind of get home wherever I wanted. It would, at the time when I was getting recruited, I stepped in, they were, Wilkes was ranked, 7th or 8th in the country. It was coming off a really good year. Chris Krawczyk was actually coming off a national runner-up finish. Funny enough, the guy who Chris Krawczyk lost to in the national finals was Devin Biscaha from Springfield College, which is pretty wild. Like it's crazy how full circle that came. Like, it's like, anyway, but you could take that with what you want, but so that was pretty wild, right? But yeah, Chris Krawczyk was coming off a national runner-up finish. You had Mark Hartenstein, who was a national qualifier, and a couple other guys that were just really competitive in that room, and so I was like, yeah, this is going to be a great room for me to be in. Great campus, had a good business program, and they were adding a sport management major, and and that's kind of what I wanted to do. And then so once I got on campus and kind of got immersed with the team, I realized like this is this is a good fit for me. I think it was a culture shock a little bit initially, just because I'm a kid from Southwest Long Island going to Wilkesburg, PA, which is like rural PA, and so like that was different, right? But it was fun, and got to be around a lot of guys that grew up in different areas and different cultural backgrounds, and it was all with one kind of common goal, right? Just to be really competitive at wrestling and enjoy our experience and develop while we were there. Obviously, between Laudenslager and Mitch Marks, who obviously you got to get coached by too. Mitch Marks, was an assistant there for a while. He was a 3-time All-American at Kings. He was, a phenomenal coach. And he was a guy that, he also had very high expectations for you. He's going to be hard on you. He's going to hold you accountable. And, but also, one of the, between him and Laudenslager, two of the most personable and relatable coaches that you can, possibly be around. Right. So I think as a coaching staff, we had a really diverse staff, and that was really able to connect with a lot of different types of guys, but also stay really patient with us. Right. And any college coach knows that, or any coach that's coaching even through high school or college, you gotta be patient, and you gotta be, willing to mentor kids. And I think that's what, Laudenslager and Mitch were really good at, was they were really great at mentoring, and I think there's a difference between, just coaching guys in wrestling and then mentoring, and I think between those two, they were really good at mentoring. They got beyond the surface. They, you can confide in them in a lot of different areas in your life, and because that's a challenging time, right? 18 and 22, you're going through so many different, life experiences. Maybe for the first time, you're going through a lot of emotions. You're experiencing things that maybe you've never experienced before, right? So they were really provided a safe environment in that way. And then also, relationships with guys on the team that, it was just a fun time, right? It was between how competitive it was in the room, but how supportive it was when we were competing alongside each other. We knew that we had a good thing going, culture wise. Right. But then, it was cool because, I remember watching guys like, or hearing about guys like, Hardenstein and, in high school, because he was a great wrestler in Easton, PA. Or I remember watching, a guy like Kyle Diesel, who was a New York State runner up, because I was a New York guy. Right. So I remember watching him, and then, Michael Fleck, right. Or Giuseppe Ray, like all these guys, like, I'm trying to think, Mizar Mendoza, right? There was just so many good guys in that room. And I remember hearing about them a little bit when I was in high school. And so then being on the team with them it was really cool. So, but I think one of the things that why the experience was kind of so transformational for me and kind of led me down a path to want to provide that experience for other guys as a college coach now is because of, one, I think Laudenslager did a great job of taking the program. He ran the program really well, but took it really seriously, and everything from recruiting to, engaging alumni, right? You remember Mike Lee coming to talk to us?
Yeah, I could not forget Mike Lee.
Yeah, 1974 national championship, team. Actually, fun fact, Wilkes was the first Division III national championship team. So the first year Division III wrestling was created.
Oh, smack! Was that
1974 season, and Wilkes, won the first ever Division III national championship. So that's again Wilkes wrestling history, right? It's pretty cool. So, but yeah, so it was on a team with a lot of competitive guys. Laudenslager did a great job of engaging alumni and really making sure our experience as student athletes were a positive one, And then, as I got later in my career, I was doing things like doing admissions tours, right? Like I was primarily only the wrestling recruits ever, So I learned how to, engage with parents and talk to student, prospective, wrestlers and being able to really, kind of bridge the gap between what do I like about my experience, what does Wilkes have to offer, and how can I communicate that? And really, that's like probably one of the most integral parts of the job as a college coach, right? Is to communicate, what your program is about, what your institution is about, and how that can potentially be the best fit for, for, a prospective student athlete and their family. And so I learned that skill early on, at Wilkes. And, I had been on so many, had lunch with so many recruits with Slogger, right. Or took them around the athletic facilities with him. So I learned how to kind of recruit like when I was in college, and that's, and again, in college wrestling, like that was, or in college wrestling, that's the lifeline, right, of any program is recruiting. But then also retaining your current guys, right? And I think you did a really good job of making sure that we as a team were really well taken care of so that we were having a positive experience, but also a challenging one that helped us grow. And did that in a lot of different ways. I remember, we did a lot of team building stuff or, team leadership development stuff. And that didn't mean that we sat in a session and talked about leadership, right? But it would be, maybe we would do something in practice or he would have a talk with us after practice where, really got us thinking about, and uncovered a lot of different perspective about how to view the sport, how to view the program, the team, how to view them as coaches, So I think that was, those are things that made me realize, like, man, you're, as a college coach, you could really, really make an impact on young people. So, and really the trajectory of their lives. I mean, we had some alumni, engagement stuff, since I've been here at Springfield and to meet some alums and talk about their stories, even when they're, decades removed. And I honestly think the pride and or the affinity for your experience as a wrestler almost grows as you get older. Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes as maybe alum when you're 20, 30 years out, obviously depending on how much you're engaged with the coach, your pride in that experience could almost be greater than it was when you're, maybe 25 or 30, right? Only a couple of years out of college. So, so I think, it kind of just tells you, like, maybe you don't see that impact now, when guys are graduating or whatever, but you certainly, there's certainly a lot that can be, benefited and developed in these guys' lives if they're getting coached at the college level. So that's a long answer to your question, but it's it's multifaceted. I could go on that for days, but that's kind of the, I guess, the gist of it.
Right. It was a worthwhile long answer, though. And before I'll circle back and probably push you further in terms of how that then translates into your current coaching philosophy. But I am interested in drawing parallels with our own experiences at Wilkes and, see where they're the same, see where they're different, and talk about that overlap. Because for me, it was definitely a different experience where I kept telling myself that I wasn't going to wrestle in college. I, by no stretch of the imagination, was, especially within the land of Pennsylvania high school wrestling, by no stretch of the imagination was I someone that was going to be recruited from a top 10 team, even when that's at the D3 level. Coaches weren't going to go out of their way to be like, hey, we really want you at my school.
Right.
But when I was at Wilkes for a pharmacy open house, I asked if the coaches were there. At this point, I had already wrestled the senior postseason. My goal was to qualify for individual states. Spoiler, I did not do that. And you get these things in your head and you're like, I just want to accomplish this one goal and then I can hang it up or whatever. But I didn't do that. So it kind of leaves this chip on your shoulder. So after a couple months at most, I end up at a pharmacy open house or something like that. I think I was already quote unquote committed to Wilkes or whatever you want to call it, to like go there for pharmacy, but I had to go back for like they may have called it VIP day or something. I don't know what the gist of it was. But I asked if I could talk to Schlager, and I did, and we walked around campus and whatnot. After I talked to him, I think it was Dawson, who was, I think, in your class or maybe a year above you.
Yeah, he was trying to think. He might have been 2 years above me. He actually got his bachelor's and master's at Wilkes. So but we were on it. We were on a team together for 3 years. So that was so I got to know Dawson Dawson well. We actually lived together for a year when I was at Bloomsburg, so we were roommates for a year. When I was at Bloomsburg post-grad or post-Wilkes, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So Dawson gave me my tour and whatnot, and I kind of talked about my interest in wrestling in a way with Schlager, where I was like,
yeah,
hey, I'm coming out of my way to talk to you, like knowing that I'm not bringing the most value to the team in terms of my high school resume. But if you want to have someone in the room that's going to work their face off, like that's all I want to do. And he's like, well, that's all we want. So like, please wrestle if that's, what you want to do. He's very welcoming. And he didn't have to be. He had no reason to look at my, my high school wrestling record and want me in his room. It wasn't self-evident that I would help Wilkes Wrestling in any way, shape, or form. But he was still very welcoming. And from day one, whenever I got to campus as a freshman, you go through the grind and you get thrown in it right away. Thankfully, I think I was part of a high school wrestling program, both at my high school, Juniata, and at a club that were they had pretty high expectations for you. And I felt like I hit the lottery in terms of the coaches I had there. For sure, there was sometimes some in-your-face coaches, and I don't mind that if that's how they want to coach. But I had some experiences with coaching styles that I think mirrored that of Schlager's, meaning they're kind of reserved, but they still hold you to incredibly high expectations. And I love being in that environment. They keep it fun. They love the sport, but they're going to make it known that they're holding you to an incredibly high standard, but also not freak out if you fall short, you have a mistake or whatever, whether it's on the mat or off the mat. They're like, they want to get you back up on your feet as quick as possible. Nonetheless, the high standard is still there. So, of course, throughout wrestling at Wilkes, I for sure don't go on to be the most winningest wrestler in Wilkes wrestling history, but Schlager gave me many outlets to kind of, I guess, enter a leadership role within Wilkes Wrestling. And again, he didn't have to, but he saw that I guess I just wanted to cultivate myself as a leader, and he gave me those options. So I guess it was that the belief he had in me to become something a lot more, even though it wasn't immediately apparent to myself, and by being on the team with people like you as well, where there was times where I went 0-2 or 1-2 or 2-2 out of a tournament and like didn't make it to the second day of a tournament, and you would see me like distraught over this, I don't do whatever, doing sprints somewhere in the hallway and some hidden off hallway or shadow drilling or whatever, and people like you were kind enough to realize that even though I wasn't the best attribute to the team in terms of competitive performance, that it meant so much to me. Like but perhaps sometimes to my own detriment, I attached so much weight to wrestling. It was and still is so incredibly important to me. I think I have a little more healthier relationship now and don't have all of my identity tied up with my wins and losses in wrestling. But nonetheless, I had attached and still attach a lot of weight to wrestling. So yeah, I guess for me, I don't know if it was like it was so unexpected that I was even going to wrestle in college in the first place. I don't know if I felt as much anxious about it as much as I got in my own head about whether or not I'm welcome here. I wasn't recruited, like this room is freaking tough and whatnot. So I think there was a point in time, or, spread over my first one to maybe bleeding into my second year at Wilkes, whereas like getting in my own head about like, am I really welcome on this team, that sort of thing. And fortunately, I had people like you in leadership roles and like Schlager and Mitch Marks and so on that were very welcoming and offered, a lot of constructive criticism and gave me positive feedback and were like, hey man, I see you're working really hard and whatnot. And just to echo one more thing you brought up about Schlager that I think is kind of in general is a good leadership quality, is that they are people that you can confide in, even though they are the same people that are holding you to that incredibly high standard. I never felt as if I couldn't talk to them about something I'm going through on or off the mat. And look, we've all been through our own individual dark times that are unique to each individual for sure. In college, I'd imagine for them, and maybe for you as a coach now, that might be someone struggling with grades, or it might be someone struggling with alcohol, or it might be on the mat. People are just very distraught about the lack of results they're getting. There's these themes, but for each individual, it's unique, right? And they did a good job at being your friend when they had to be your friend and being your coach when they had to be your coach. And I think in hindsight, there was almost a skill in discerning, when to be more of a coach, and which I mean, hey, go to this, do this workout, what have you. But they also could discern very quickly, when do I need to be a friend and listen. Yep. That was kind of my experience.
Yeah, no, that was a great kind of, I'm glad you elaborated on a lot of those things, because there's a lot to unpack there, right? Like as you're talking, I'm like, wow, that's so many insightful points. But to the point of belief that you mentioned, I mean, for one, Cole, I mean, for your work ethic and your discipline, those are things that are sustainable, right? Like those, I mean, the wins and losses, they come and go, and there's that those are the kind of things, the habits of an athlete are really what enhances a team's interpersonal relationships. And for you as a leader, you were a guy who led by example. Because of those reasons, team got better, right? So and again, it's I think there's performance leaders and there's there's, you could say, cultural leaders or relationship leaders almost, right? But if you want to categorize it like that, but leadership comes in a lot of different ways, and obviously you implemented that, in various ways, because we all know guys who are phenomenally talented and skilled in the wrestling ability, who could win a lot of matches, and maybe they're just they're not guys that you want to be around, right? So, or they're not guys who you would want to hang out with, right? And so I would take, a guy like you over any day over, a guy who is, maybe national championship caliber, but who is a thorn in our side at every step of the way. Because we've all known, guys like that, right? Who are not, maybe the best people to be around. So, you can take that for what it's worth, right? But it's, but there's a lot of, there's a lot of value, and clearly, you're kind of actualizing it now with, you're going to have a doctorate in pharmacy, right? And again, saw you just published some great research in your field. So, so those are the things that, you're making a difference in the world. It's a little bit broader of a spectrum, right? When you look at it, and obviously that stems from the habits you built through wrestling, right? But I think it's also just kind of who you are. But to the point of belief, I think, that's what Slogger did really well. And it's funny because we talked to, here at Springfield, we have a national championship coach, and Charlie Sullivan. He's our men's volleyball coach. And he actually wrote a book, and the book is titled "Winning the Game of Belief." And obviously there's many layers to this, but the one pillar that separates high performing teams versus maybe teams that are not as consistent in their performance are bridging that gap between belief and having that self-confidence and being able to instill belief in your athletes, and then in turn athletes believing in themselves because of that emphasis on constantly instilling belief, and obviously that comes in a lot of different ways. So for and again, yeah, Slogger was really good at that, right? Like providing leadership opportunities for guys who deserved it, but also I think what he was really good at too is like maybe he was able to kind of see someone for who they could be, not who they were in that current moment, right? And because of that, he provided opportunities for guys to lead and get involved in a professional development opportunity and grow in that way. And again, there's a lot of different ways to add value to a program other than the win-loss column, right? There's a lot of ways to contribute. So, if you're a leader on campus, if you're a great personality to be around in the room, those are things that always trickle back to really impact the program in a positive way. And I've been a part of programs where we've had a guy who it's interesting, right? It's like you get a guy who maybe wasn't the best performance guy, but was a great guy to be around. Everyone on campus loved him. Went on to have a successful career, and he was able to onboard some guys who were really successful and talented wrestlers because of the fact that people just liked him, right? It's like, he was a year above he's on a high school team with some of these good guys, and he's a year or two above them. People just like him. So, okay, I'm going to bring two really good wrestlers from my high school on board, and they're national champion, national caliber guys, right? All American caliber guys. So I think there's a lot of value that guys can add to a program other than just winning and losing. And I'm not just talking about yourself, because obviously you've added a lot of value to the Wilkes program. You won the what was that academic award at graduation?
The Wendell Award.
The Wendell Award, right? So we actually had that 2 years in a row with you and Josh Evans winning it, right? So only one person on campus in your whole class gets that award. So and the only time Wilkes Wrestling was mentioned in that whole commencement ceremony was when you received that award, right? So those are things you got to think about, right? It's like that's value you added to the program that you may not even think about. But I was at that commencement ceremony, right? You had Wilkes Wrestling get a shout out, you had John Laudenslager get a shout out, and then obviously you get the prestige of having that award, which is, obviously you didn't do it for Slager or for Wilkes Wrestling, you did it for yourself, but you're positively affecting so many other people that you're associated with because of your own work ethic. So I think that you do have, as a coach, you have to be being able to see things from a lot of different angles and see all sides of it, of a person and not just who they are on the mat. And obviously Slager does that really well because he's given, guys a lot of opportunities that, quote unquote, maybe weren't, college, maybe national caliber guys, but they deserve an opportunity to wrestle at the college level if they're willing to put in the work. Right. So yeah. So I think that's a really important part of Division III. Maybe sometimes, at maybe other levels or higher levels that may not happen as often, where there's roster caps. And maybe you have to make cuts, or you can only allow, so many people in the room or on the roster at once, right? So, I mean, for us, I remember at Wilkes, we would have huge rosters, right, and have a lot of guys on the team, and that was kind of the fun part of it, right? We traveled with kind of a big squad every time, and just had a lot of guys associated with the program, and it was always like a really great community feel, right, around our program. So yeah, so I think that is a really positive part of the Division III experience, but then also, a coach like Laudenslager who really fostered that welcoming environment, and a lot of it too, right? You talk about it's being accepting, right? Like, I think one of the things you never want to be around as a coach or as a person is people who are, kind of judgmental, right, on everything you say or do or whatever, right? So I think that's, something that's really great about, Coach Laudenslager, right? He's just, no matter what type of personality you had, you could be, you could be into some unusual things, you could put, whatever, right? It's like, we're not going to judge you, right? You could be who you want to be, and you're still going to be a part of this team, right? And so that's something that, again, fosters that welcoming environment that, guys really need to make sure that they feel safe and they can develop, and that's probably why so many guys found him as like a confidant, because of that. But then again, also holding you to that high standard where you trust him and you're like, man, I've confided in him, I can trust him, and he's still holding me accountable, and he still believes I can do this, despite all of the limitations in my own mind, right? And when you have someone else instill that belief in you, it's a little bit easier to kind of, strive forward. So I think I was listening to an interview with Tom Ryan, and he said,
head coach of Ohio State Wrestling for the non-wrestling listeners.
Yeah, I was listening to the interview with Tom Ryan, and he And he said, he has a lot of good sound bites, but one of his sound bites that I've really taken to as a coach is you can't ever believe until you've been believed in, right? So I think that that's something that Coach Lonsliver did really well, and obviously to the guys that he believed in. I don't think he was saying that for everyone, So just because he was a very much shooter, he was a straight shooter, and what he said he meant, So I think that those are all really kind of important elements to maybe why that experience was so positive, for us.
Right. Speaking of belief, it reminds me of a quote that stuck with me for a while from an author, Hal Elrod. He wrote a book called The Miracle Equation, another book I believe called The Miracle Morning. And the premise of The Miracle Equation, so I'm kind of just paraphrasing what I understand to be the premise of the entire book, is that kind of the two prerequisites, essentially the only two things that matter for whatever vague word you want to use for success or happiness or fulfillment, it doesn't really matter. It is some goal that you have, whether it's in your personal, professional, or otherwise life. There is, some form of goal that you have. And he says that the only two variables are, one, effort over a very long timeline, and two, unwavering belief that you can actually turn your dreams into reality. And these variables that he goes on to elaborate about within the book is that you can't have one without the other. It's kind of a chicken and the egg, I don't know, experience, because for one, it's hard to truly believe in yourself if, look, your self-narrative that you're constantly forming in your head, whether you want to or not, is going to be built off of the stream of decisions you are making constantly. Every little decision, whether it's how long it takes you to get out of bed after your alarm goes off, how you eat, how you speak, how you even talk to yourself about yourself, in between your own ears. So that stream of decisions, aka in his language, the effort that you're putting in to hopefully make the right decisions that are in service of your long-term goals or short-term goals or whatever, they matter. But it's hard to sustain making a long stream of decisions unless you truly have belief that's actually going to work out. And this becomes a very circular thing where it's like, okay, but you don't have the belief unless you're actually doing the work to cultivate that belief. So you can't really have one without the other. It's hard for, so that comes up in my head. I think about that a lot. As a circle back, you kind of already did segue right into some of these principles you're talking about has become your current coaching philosophy. I don't know if it's as simple as a hashed out principle list, but what are some of the core tenets you feel like describe your current coaching philosophy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's evolved, right? Because actually one of the things that's been great, it's kind of really been a really great growth year this year because of the pandemic, right? Because we're not competing. We don't have the same routine with, all right, let's train hard for the week and, get ready for competition and, get our weight off and all these, the interesting part about this year is we were training, we're training from January to April, just practicing, right? We didn't have any competition. We had some things planned out. They kind of fell through. So the interesting part about this year, from our perspective as coaches, was managing motivation, right? Because you didn't have that maybe carrot at the end of the stick with competition and that sort of thing, right? We were only training. We were really there's nothing to train for. And then obviously you have the stressors of, college students are going through a really hard time right now, right? I mean, you're on a college campus, like, your college experience is extremely compromised and limited right now, right? You have to, you're isolated. You can only maybe hang out with, a few people, You got to be really cognizant of who you're spending your time around, because maybe you don't know who they're spending their time around. You don't want to get quarantined, right? All these things, right? And so you're also trying to focus on school, and you're going to class on Zoom, and that interaction just quite isn't the same, right? And so there are so many different elements of the current college experience that we're kind of pouring into, what we had to kind of manage as coaches. And that was a lot, right? And then I'll obviously throw on top of, some of the challenging, kind of some of the challenging things that are going on in our world, right? There's a lot of other issues, right? So when you kind of put that all together, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all people trying to manage all these issues, right? So I think managing motivation this year was really huge, right? So because of that, that helped me kind of evolve my coaching philosophy on what's really important, right? You don't have that high of, we just won a big dual meet, or we just had a guy beat a ranked guy in the country, now he's going to be ranked, right? Or we don't have that maybe evidence or that validation of, okay, we're doing something right here as a staff and a program because of maybe some of the performance outcomes. And that's not to say that we measure or we validate our what we're doing as a coaching staff because of performance outcomes, but it does give us some metric, right? Because I think, it's kind of like, you're measuring, qualitative or quantitative research, right? Like quantitative is a little bit easier because the numbers, right? And so for us this year, it's like, we can only measure kind of how we've grown as a team through our, obviously relationships, and then obviously some of the engagement that we've had all year, and I'm really proud of this team because we had great engagement all year, and guys were really focused. But kind of circle back to your question, to the coaching philosophy, Peach, we actually have a sports psychologist that works, very intimately with our team and our guys. And so he's a doctoral candidate in the sport and exercise psychology program, and really loves combat sports, and worked with our wrestlers last year, and then obviously this year. And because of that, we even have a sports psych department, so I've been able to kind of tap into some great resources on coaching style and leadership styles. Our head coach actually has his doctorate in sport leadership. So, we're able to, kind of, collaborate on, okay, how do we design a practice that, maybe fits or facilitates the learning that we're trying to meet, if we're trying to, implement this specific theory, right? And again, it doesn't ever go to that much granular detail, but sometimes it does. Sometimes it does, right? I mean, we talk about, one of the things, I'd say there's two big things I learned about this year as a coach that really define and categorize my coaching philosophy, but also categorize what I need to maybe do in coaching situations. One of that is self-determination theory. And there's kind of three elements of self-determination theory. And I'm no expert on this by any means. I'm simply, able to kind of apply it because it could be it's a very simple thing to apply. It's not always, cut and dry and cookie cutter and easy, but it's a very simple concept. So there's kind of three elements to self-determination theory. One is autonomy, right? Kind of giving an athlete the feeling that they have some choice in what they're doing, and that they're able to kind of have some of their own, flavor to what they're doing, right? Because I think that's one of the things that happens a lot in coaching is coaches can become very controlling. And so, leaving guys room to, make their own decisions, or, if you're your coach and you're running a practice and we just went through a hard drill, what do you guys want to do? Do you guys want to do one match or do you want to do shark bait? Having some choice in the matter, right? And it can be as simple as that. It could be as simple as, do you want to go shark bait or do you want to go live? And again, maybe some guys will think, oh, like that's not really a big deal, but it does go a long way in terms of coaching, because I promise you, every time we've done that, guys were more motivated to go live than if we said, all right, we're going right into shark bait. And, you got to read your room, right? I mean, those are things, but so I think that was huge, right? Even if we're scheduling, meetings with our guys or talking to them about a certain technique, right? asking questions, right? Motivational interviewing is a big thing, right? It's like being able to kind of put the ball in their court and ask them questions, as opposed to maybe that traditional, authoritative style of coaching of hammering them with, or prescribing them with everything they need to do, because you just can't do that, right? There's no absolutes in life or wrestling or coaching for that matter. Another one is competence, right? Making sure as a coach you're validating what they're doing. If they're bringing ideas to you, you're or even in conversation, right? Like in interactions, how can you make sure that they understand that things that they're saying or doing are are things that they should be validated and they should be encouraged in, right? Because sometimes we have some really bright, every place I've coached at, we've had some really bright guys, and and sometimes they're not confident in what they bring to the table, right? And so it's like, being able to instill that confidence and give them maybe evidence of, you're thinking at a pretty high level here. You're doing things at a high level, and you can hold your own, and maybe it doesn't always sound like quite like that, right? But it's specific to that individual, specific to maybe what they're saying or their circumstance or whatever. So, or that could be as simple as making, and wrestling coaches do this well, I think, in some respects, is, hey, you do this technique really well. Why don't you teach it to the team? Something Slager did really well, right? Is make sure guys feel like, hey, like I am good at this. I am competent in this manner. And it doesn't always have to be in wrestling, but that it's in any facet, right? In any sort of communication that you're doing. And then another one is relatedness, right? So being able to, as a coach, be personable, be able to relate to the guy, but also kind of being inclusive, right? Like, what is the one thing that sport provides, right? And this, and it's a sense of belonging, right? That's why we love being on teams. We love being on, you love probably being in the pharmacy program, right? And just because you had that sense of belonging in that program. So how can we as a coach create that sense of belonging and inclusiveness? Because we've all maybe been a part of a group or a team that, we're maybe titled to being a part of that team, but we don't really feel like we belong or we're not included, right? So making sure that as a coach, you're able to include a lot of guys in a lot of things. And that could be as simple as, hey, we're sitting in a leadership committee meeting, because we have a leadership committee, right? And we have, a couple guys on our leadership committee, and 4 guys or two or three guys are doing all the talking. Well, and we just had an hour meeting, and we have 4 other guys sitting there. Well, making sure that we're, calling on that guy, including that guy, and what maybe, he might want to say, right? So that they, because some guys won't speak up unless they're called on, right? It's a leadership thing, right? Is how can we, solicit their feedback and make sure they feel included, and then also really validate and encourage that, so they can have that, sense of belonging, so they can obviously feel like they're contributing to what they're doing, because they are. And then obviously, that, and I think if you can apply those kind of elements effectively, all of them will create one, more trust, more buy-in, and then obviously, build more confidence in your athletes. More, how can they perceive themselves to be, leaders and things like that. So they need to think it just enhances that self-esteem, that self-efficacy, right? But obviously it's self-determination theory, so they're more self-determined to be able to, accomplish tasks on their own and be self-sufficient. Again, that's kind of like the theoretical kind of approach. It's not like if you apply these things, there's evidence of like, oh, this is absolutely going to work, right? But it is, it is a really, I think, cool framework or worthwhile framework to operate from. And then there's another one that's a little bit more involved of kind of a theory. It's called Autonomy, supportive coaching, and and that's kind of similar to maybe what I mentioned, but being able to include guys in the process and making sure they have a choice in what they're saying or doing on the mat, and just providing that space for them to kind of take control of their own that developmental journey, so you're not prescribing everything, you're not controlling everything as a coach. And that comes in a lot of different layers, but I would say as a general framework, things I think about as a coach is, how can I apply one or all three of these elements of self-determination theory in some way, shape, or form, and then also sometimes, man, it's just, you just step outside yourself, right, and just have fun with guys too, build relationships, and guys make fun of you, you make fun of them, and all that stuff, right? So sometimes it's as simple as just being present, but I do think that you still have to be intentional in those interactions, because there's not always, some of those interactions could be finite, right? Like, you're maybe not talking to an athlete as much as you would, a significant other or a sibling, right, or something like that. So you got to make sure that you make the most of each interaction, even though, I see these guys every day, but we also have 40 guys in the room, right? I'm not going to get, or 30 guys in the room or whatever, depending on, this year we had some guys stay at home, but we usually have 40 guys on the roster. I'm not going to be able to talk to, right, all 40 guys in the practice. It's not possible. So, making sure you're intentional in those interactions so you can make sure that they're meaningful.
Right. So we'll for sure come back to talking about presence, because we had an interesting little conversation over Instagram where I think I offered some friendly pushback / was playing devil's advocate, but I thought you had some very insightful things to say about being present, not even necessarily in the context of coaching, but how you approach future goals, etc. But before we do, just to make sure I'm understanding self-determination correctly, the general tenets then, the three would be autonomy, competence, and relatedness were
Yes, sir.
three, right? So it sounds like those would be autonomy clearly, but even the other two, especially competence, I think, sounds like those get built by giving options for leadership roles, and maybe not even a set position as a captain or whatever, all of that aside, but you're giving them and this goes to any team, right? Not just talking about wrestling teams or even sports teams, but your team in the workplace or whatever. In my limited life experience so far, whether it was being in the position of a captain at Wilkes or as a president of our honor society at school, I think I came in at first with the principle. Well, I think I had one principle, and it was, I'm going to outwork everyone. I'm just going to be the hardest worker in the room, and that's all I have to do. That's all there is to it. The rest will follow. And while a hard work ethic is extremely valuable, there are some other attributes that go into being a good leader that it took a while to get, in my hard head, I guess. But it sounds like this is coming back to it. It sounds like those three things would be augmented by delegating leadership responsibility roles, or just
absolutely.
And, it took me a while to understand that. I still, for sure, do not apply it perfectly. I might not ever. But, obviously you're increasing autonomy by, giving them some project, some job to do. Maybe in the context of wrestling, that's to show a move. But in the workplace, it might be a big project. And even though you're the leader, maybe delegating X or Y project out to one of your team members that you're leading, they make that their own, right? So not only are you giving them their autonomy, which most people would prefer as opposed to being micromanaged, but the competence increases when they now are, it's no longer theoretical. You have this task that I'm asking you do, and provided that you're agreeable that you want to take it on, now it's on you, right? So you as you say teach wrestling move, you're almost certainly going to become even more confident, because now you have to explain what you're doing. Or if you're doing a project in the workplace or within academia, now you become more confident because you actually have to do the thing. And I would argue that it probably increases the relatedness as well, as a function of not micromanaging people and telling them you have to do all of these little things, but rather showing that you trust them to put out high quality work and operate on their own and all those things.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And again, it kind of goes back to maybe some of the opportunity that Slaughter provided you, right? Is that created that, one, your feeling of feeling competent, and then also, relatedness and because you felt included of the work that was going on in the program, right? And you felt included in, in kind of the bigger picture of what the program is trying to accomplish, and more invested in the mission, right? And you're able to, because of that, you're able to see, exactly what goes into maybe running a program. So maybe, and in turn, maybe you now have more respect for the work that Slaughter puts in, right? Or things like that. So I think it's always going to be a mutually beneficial thing once you're able to, leave people room to develop and give them responsibility.
Right. I agree. Now, as I promised, I'll come back to talking about presence. So I want to open up my phone quick and read something you sent me about presence after a little exchange. So while I'm pulling it up,
I will say another thing about just the coaching philosophy piece. One of the kind of I guess you could call it an organization. They're like a coaching development organization. It's a company called What Drives Winning. A guy named Brett Ledbetter runs it. He's like he used to be a basketball coach and was a consultant, is kind of a coaching consultant to a lot of, really high level and elite basketball coaches and college basketball athletes and even some, I believe, some professional players. So, but anyway, his big, I guess his fundamental principle with that company and his coaching development or his coaching education is about, making sure you're able to separate the person from the player. But one of the things I think that he does really well is he's able to, he's not just producing all this work of what he believes a great coach should do. He's a great interviewer, and he's interviewing the best coaches in the country and arguably in the world, right? And so he's able to really kind of peel a lot of layers in these interviews, and he's interviewed John Smith before, right? Like he's interviewed John Smith and talked to him about his kind of journey to being the 6-time world champ that he is, right? Or an Olympic champ, 2-time Olympic champ. So but anyway, one of his fundamental, again, principles is being able to separate that person from the player, and that character drives results, not just talent or anything like that. And so and this goes back to your point of, well, what happens in society is we develop a value system around winning and losing. We develop a value system around outcomes, right? And you said this before, your self-worth was kind of so tied into, winning and losing wrestling matches at a certain point, right? I was the same way. You talk to any competitive wrestler, it was the same way, right? And for most guys, they've had similar experiences at some point in their college wrestling experience. And so what happens is we develop this value system around winning and losing. Okay, you won. You receive praise, validation, and attention, and all of this stuff, right? And you associate that with, okay, winning is inherently good, right? And you lose, and maybe your coaches maybe treat you a little bit different, or you get perceived a little bit differently, or maybe people aren't treating you quite the same because you're not winning as much, right? And again, that's not to say that this happens to every college wrestler. I think there's an extraordinary amount of great coaches out there that don't treat their wrestlers differently when they win or lose, and we need to continue that, right? But inherently, there is that the majority of maybe sport is kind of centered around that value system that society has created or affirmed, right? When you win, it's good. When you lose, it's bad, right? And so we're always associating sport with like this roller coaster of outcomes. right? And so that's never really a healthy roller coaster to be on. And so really being able to, as a coach, dive into who the person is, who the athlete is, and in turn you'll be able to kind of develop and empower that person and connect with the person, and they'll always become a better performer because of the fact that they know, okay, coach knows my self-worth is in my family, my friends, and the things I want to do in my career, not in my wrestling, right? You build that trust. That trust is better as a coach. It's more meaningful because I know who they are as a person, and then in turn, there's less pressure on the outcome when they go out and perform, right? And so those are things that, and again, there's a lot of different ways to think about that particular, I guess, idea of kind of tethering your self-worth to outcomes. But at the end of the day, that's, if we can accomplish that as coaches, then I think we're on the right path.
It's interesting you brought that up because I have thought about a lot over the past year or two about the difference between fragile identities and anti-fragile identities. Have you heard, are you familiar with what I mean by anti-fragile identity?
I want you to elaborate. I can assume some things, but yeah, I'd love to hear you elaborate on that.
So the gist is taking an identity in something that the stronger you try to break it down, the more it reinforces that identity. So for example, a fragile identity would be wanting to be right. So you're either going to do an unhealthy thing, like put yourself in a room where you're always the right person, and just you probably don't want to be in that position where you're intentionally finding a not so smart room so you can feel like the smartest person. Right. Similarly, if you're in an argument, you don't want to be the person that refuses to admit that they don't know or that they're wrong, and so on. Whereas the anti-fragile counterpart would be something such as taking an identity and being the learner, where you're either going to experience positive reinforcement by maybe being right, quote unquote, right about something in some circumstances, but you're going to experience even more positive reinforcement when you are wrong and then go on to learn, because you are intentionally creating your identity around being the learner. Like, oh, you proved me wrong, or I'm in conversations where I don't know. I'm going to make it my quote unquote superpower where I want to be the first to admit that I don't know, or the first to admit when I'm wrong. And then people, generally speaking, will be quick to help fill in the gaps or point you in the right direction. And suddenly you're not only having your identity broken down because you have this fragile attachment to being correct or right all the time, but rather you are experiencing positive reinforcement because you set your value system up around being the learner. And this is just one example. A lot of that language is kind of borrowed from Tom Bilyeu, a dude who started Quest Nutrition, now a host of Impact Theory. So I stole a lot of that verbiage from him, but in my own life, it means, for example, building an identity around being a learner is one thing. I kind of think of like a capital I identity and then a bunch of lowercase I identities that I wear. And for me personally, that means taking a capital I identity within my Christian faith and a lowercase I identity around being a learner/scientist. A scientist in the truest sense of the word. Like, I test my assumptions. I'm not tied to some idea. I want to stress test these things in which I believe in, so as to play the truth-seeking game, right? I want to build an identity around being a leader, a problem solver, a fighter. These things that, as you try to stress test them, as you try to knock down these identities, you only experience more positive reinforcement. Like, if I take an identity and being the fighter at something, what are you going to do to hurt that person? You give them struggle and they're happy. They're like, yes, this is what I do. I make friends with struggle. I conquer it. It's like, so I have been thinking a lot more about I guess how to cultivate and then continually reinforce these anti-fragile identities. It sounds like that echoes a lot of what you were talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good pivot from kind of some of the things I mentioned. But yeah, I think having that learning orientation, no matter where you're at, is important. Being oriented towards learning, because you could always walk in a room and try to protect your ego or identity, where you're like, oh, you don't want to be wrong, or you always want to kind of defend your claims and things like that. And but I do think that that's really important, is being willing to admit, one, you're maybe you're wrong, or you've made a mistake, and or two, that you don't know, right? Like, okay, you ask a question, and maybe someone expects you to have an answer. Well, I don't know. That's a good question. We'll figure it out, because I think people will be able to kind of sense and see through if you act like something you don't, and just being able to kind of really be I guess secure enough, right, to know or to be able to say, like, I don't know, I made a mistake, etc. And then in turn learning can happen, right? And I think connection can happen too, because having that humility really humanizes yourself, and hopefully will humanize the other person too, because I think that's what we need more of. We don't need egos colliding and people trying to that never really you never really get anywhere with that, right? It just becomes hyper competitive in climates or environments that are never really that productive. So anytime that there can be that kind of sense of humility, good thing, a lot of learning can happen.
Right. I could not agree more. I would be remiss if I didn't circle back to your take on presence. So I asked over one of our in an ongoing Instagram chat with you, I was kind of being facetious, and I was like, oh, and you're like, what's the 50-year plan? Because you told me like kind of what the the next couple years look like, and after some back and forth, and your first response was essentially like, I'm focused on the present moment, and I was like, I think that's a great take. I also think there's a lot of reward that comes from executing on long-term goals. And here was one of your responses that stuck out to me a lot.
Yeah.
You said, I hear you. I think having a long-term goal in mind is valuable to provide direction and make informed decisions from. However, the long-term goal we make for ourselves at 21 or 22 is made with the information and life experiences that's most salient to us in that moment. As life progresses, we gain new experiences and insights. With that, we either draw new conclusions on what goal is best fit for us and maybe embark on new paths entirely. We see it all the time, right? People change careers for whatever reasons, and maybe they have kids, and that changes their perspective on what's important. Goals provide direction, but I've learned finding contentment comes from a present-focused mindset. Achieving goals are important, but I don't know that we're ever really quote-unquote happy once we achieve any desired outcome. So could you kind of expand on that strain of information? I think in its own right, it speaks a ton of value, right? But could you kind of expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, no, I appreciate one. I'm glad that I'm glad that we were able to exchange some dialogue in that message, because that's it's always funny, because presence is important, and so I say that because I think I was always, maybe in college especially, I was always a guy who had this plan mapped out, like I'm going to go to school and do this, and I'm going to have this job, and again it's probably pretty common for a lot of young professionals that are driven and want to just get their foot in the door and kind of get their hands on everything. So I'll tell you a little bit about my path and maybe why I see it that way, right? So I graduated from Wilkes. When I graduated from Wilkes, I went on. I coached at Wilkes University, right? It was North Central PA, and close to my alma mater. I had those connections still from that community. And I was working in, student affairs. I actually started grad school there too. I was working in student conduct, and I was a volunteer assistant coach for, a Division I wrestling program and a Division II athletic department. So I learned a lot about, some of those dynamics from like a standpoint of just learning about the NCAA structure and how those divisions differ. But and so in my head, I was like, that year, I was like, man, and it was a really impactful year, right? Really great growth opportunity, because I was getting, kind of administrative experience and, a lot of student interactions in a different way than coaching and, working in the business school and student conduct. And then I was getting, a really great education in the master's program that I was in, which was educational leadership in college student affairs. And then I was also coaching for, a great program that's kind of, rebuilding, right? Because they just got named a new head coach who was an assistant there, and then was an intern, and then moved into the head coach role for the full time. Got to, so shout out to Marcus Gordon and Russ Hughes if they ever listen to this. But those two guys were instrumental in my coaching career, because it was my first real full time, I guess, coaching experience. I was a volunteer assistant, you could say full time, whatever, but it was more of me only coaching, right? I wasn't a competitor anymore. Whatever. So yeah, I was a volunteer assistant while I was doing all these other things, and was, helping run the high school club, was recruiting, or, doing social media marketing, all this stuff. Right. And I had so much on my plate at that time. I remember I was kind of burning the candle at both ends, and in my head, I was like, all right, like, this is a really great experience because of, all of the access I had to different people, and I was getting a lot of great insight into the jobs that I had, and I was like, all right, this is the the plan. If I haven't done another year of this, I'll be really well set up and well prepared, and have a really great insight as to how to add value to any organization, right? Because of those experiences, but or any college wrestling program for that matter, or any institution. But after a year of doing that, I was like, man, like, I just want to coach, like, I only want to coach, and I was like, this is what I want to do. I have the coaching bug. I'm young. Like, why not? Right. So I left grad school. Right. And that was not my plan. Right. I left grad school, and I remember I was doing an internship, was initially, at Susquehanna. Didn't necessarily have any, concrete plans to leave Bloomsburg at the time, because I was like, all right, I'll, finish out this year. And actually applied to a position at Gettysburg College, ended up getting it, and once I got offered the job, I was like, gave myself some time to think, do I want to just continue with grad school, or leave and take on a full-time opportunity? There's not a lot of full-time assistant coaching positions in Division III, right? And this is a really great opportunity to work under someone who's a really great thinker in Andy Vogel, so great guy. And it was a great conference. It was a great school, right? Gettysburg is one of the best liberal arts colleges in the country, and great athletic department. So it's like, yeah, this is a hard decision, and ended up making it and left, right? Ended up leaving grad school and kind of that, that volunteer assistant role that I had. Went on and went and coached at Gettysburg College for 2 years. Again, was there for a full 2 years. I probably would have never have thought I was going to be at, Gettysburg when I was graduating from Wilkes, a year after I graduated from Wilkes. I never would have thought that, right? Or a year and a half later, I guess. I had never even really known much about Gettysburg, right? Like, I didn't know anything about it until, I kind of had some idea because we would compete against them and things like that, but I didn't know how good the school was. I didn't know how, competitive that athletic department was, and the conference they were in, just such a notable Division III conference. Like, didn't know any of that stuff, right? And so that in that moment when I was, 21, I was like 21, 22, and I chose Bloomsburg. I was like, all right, this is the best opportunity for me at that time, and it was a great opportunity. As I got new information and I had a whole year's worth of experience, that direction shifted a little bit, right? It wasn't like I completely went off coaching. I was like, okay, my path got a little bit clearer, where I was, okay, I want to coach, So I coached for 2 years, and then obviously came to Spring. Finished up 3 years of coaching once COVID hit. Kind of informed my decision. Like, all right, I kind of have that chip on my shoulder. I need to get my master's. That kind of chip. And I was like, all right, let me just go back to school and do that. So, but long story short, just in that kind of I guess short phase, I had so many experiences that informed my path. There's a lot of other life factors that come into play when making career decisions, right? Or decisions that maybe are best for your path at the time. So again, I think that's what changes people's perspectives. And again, I mentioned the thing of, people have kids, or maybe they work 5 years in a job and they feel like, man, this is not for me, and they change careers, right? And so again, that's hopefully it's a long answer to your question, and it may be a little long-winded with some things, but I do believe that we make decisions that are right now that are best for us at the time, with the information we have, with the life experience we have, and we can't make it any other way, right? But I do think as you get more life experience, it can shift the direction of your path. And for some, some have others have, I know some great people with very traditional paths that maybe they had set out for themselves when they were 22 and accomplished all of, had maybe accomplished the exact path that they mapped out for themselves. But again, for me, it was very much, it's kind of like approach it like a scientist view, right? Like you were saying, like you question your assumptions, you try to find that middle ground of what's the truth actually, right? And so for me, it was always a constant thing of challenging my assumptions, right? Like, you don't have to have a master's by the time you're 22. You don't have to, be in a certain role by the time you're, 25, right? If you approach things with, again, a learning mindset, and you approach things with a learning orientation, like no matter what role you're in, that's when you really develop. That's where you do great work and obviously create great relationships. And I think one of the things too I've learned about young professionals and people, even like myself early on, is and I've stopped thinking this way and I've evolved in my thinking, is you're always kind of thinking of like that next opportunity, and that's never really a good way to view a position that you're in. You never want to just keep thinking about an opportunity, right? Because that's never, you're never going to be present, right? If you're always thinking about the next thing, you're just never going to be present. So do great work where you're at, and be as kind and good of a person you could be where you're at. And we could get into the whole good bad person thing, because I think that's an interesting thing too, because there's always a duality. I don't think there's inherently ever good people or bad people. I think there's people that do good and bad things, right? So I think but anyway, so because my point being, there's a lot of information that can come at you from a lot of different angles, depending on where you're at, and depending on that information, you're going to make decisions. So yeah, I'll give you an example. My first season at Gettysburg, I got like a significant injury. But I was like healthy ever. I never had surgery before, and had experienced an injury that took me out for like 4 or 5 months. I was on crutches and was coaching on crutches for 3 months.
Wow.
And it's like, well, yeah. Again, that didn't really alter my path, but it did shift my perspective on things, and it made me experience a hardship that I wasn't expecting, and because of that hardship, I was able to. I had to kind of learn how to coach in a different way. I had to learn how to measure my worth as a coach in a different way, right? Because I couldn't just traditionally go in there and earn respect by wrestling with guys, or earn respect by showing technique, or being just a hard worker where I was doing things for guys, right? I was kind of, when you're on crutches for 3 months after surgery, you kind of got to really focus on taking care of yourself. So I had to focus on that, and then also, how can I be kind of a still that servant and coach for the guys that I'm coaching, so So yeah, so there's a lot of things, man, that a lot of curveballs, right? I mean, this pandemic alone is a huge curveball, huge, right? But yeah, so again, that's there's that's kind of my take on that.
Out of curiosity, what happened injury-wise that you were
Yeah,
on crutches for so long?
yeah. So I actually got into a pretty bad car accident.
Oh,
Honestly, and
geez.
yeah, yeah,
This, as you're saying this, I do like, it's
yeah,
coming back to me now. It's been like, well, 3 years ago at this point,
yeah. 3 years
or
ago,
however many years ago.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now that you're
Two and
saying
a
it's
half,
coming back to me.
yeah, 2.5 years. Yeah, yeah. It was it was a car accident, and again, it's like it's funny because you know, people, get worried about maybe flying, but then you look at the statistics around car accidents. It's you could get in a car accident every time you step in the car statistically, right? Or any day of the week. So, and they can, depending on the severity of them, they can be challenging ones. So, but again, yeah, had an injury there and learned how to, I think at every point in a coach's career, if you coach long enough, you're probably going to coach either on crutches with a boot on or with a sling on. That could be with a wrestling injury or an unrelated sport injury that happens. But just because we do a lot of things as people, and we could we subject ourselves to injuries at times, right? So, but again, it was. It was a learning opportunity for me, but again, not one that I necessarily expected to learn from, and I think sometimes those are maybe the most impactful in certain ways. So,
Right.
yeah, yeah, and I think too, you always, as you experience more things and you get kind of exposed to more perspectives, or you're more privy to certain conversations, you do start to challenge your own assumptions and question, do I really know as much as I thought I did? And usually the answer is you don't. You never know as much as you think you do. So, that's been kind of the interesting path for me, is that it's always been one of learning. I always kind of look back at who I was as a coach the previous year, and what I did and what I said, and or how I did things or how I coached. And there's some things I'm like, oh wow, I want to continue to do that, want to do more of it. Then there's some things I look back and I kind of like cringe at, like I probably shouldn't have done this or said that, but I think it's all part of that process of growing as as a person and as a coach, all those things.
Right. That thought process definitely resonates with me, particularly in the way that you're making it a point not to be married to your ideas, as you talk about, as
Right.
you get new information, acting accordingly, essentially. That said, I guess in my mind, while I want to take all of what you're saying principle-wise, I also think about like the importance of having at least some aim, which I don't think that you disagree with by any stretch of the imagination. But that being said, by having something to aim at, you can, it's a variety of things. For one, contribute to the world by reaching said goal, and then it's not just one goal, but by whether the goal is a skill or you aim at an occupation and you get skills along the way. By gathering these skills, you become capable of more quote unquote good for the world, right? But it's also the positive reinforcement you get as you experience progress. And as the end of your message that I read kind of alluded to, it's not the goal that you reach that makes you happy or whatever elusive word you want to use, fulfilled, whatever. It is among other things, for sure, the feeling of progress towards some goal, right? So I guess that's where I get attached to the importance of having those goals. And I'm someone that is guilty, for sure, of romanticizing the long-term goals. I will sit in my room and think about like how, for example, I might be attributing this to the wrong magician, quote-unquote magician. I think it was David Blaine, who was at a professional basketball game, and he did a card trick where after whatever the cards in his hands were, and it's like, oh, is this your card? Is this your card? And it's like, oh wait, I know where your card is. And he went and like stabs a knife in a basketball, and he's like pulls the card out, and it's like, oh, this is your card. And it's like, what in the world? And we would, as people, sooner believe that is magic than realize that he had orchestrated this over who knows how long of a timeline to put that card, in the basketball or whatever. Like that's the forethought that has to go into that is absolutely insane. And I love the idea of being able to execute on these long-term goals that are on a timeline longer than the vast majority are willing to think about. But I think it has to be exercised in conjunction with, okay, it's cool if you have this long-term vision. In fact, I think it's adds meaning if you have this long-term vision you're aiming single-mindedly at. But if you encounter new information that leads you to think that you'll enjoy this other path more, whether it's, as you said, an entirely new path or a slight adjustment to the path, and you aren't acting on it emotionally, but after you consider it and through your own reasoned judgment, you decide that, okay, this is actually what I want to do. Then you absolutely go towards that. Don't be tied, it goes back into not having your identity tied up in that thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And no, I do agree. I think goals, you certainly need goals to provide that direction. But yeah, I do think that contentment or the fulfillment comes from progress towards said goal. But I do also think it's about kind of really being able to sit in those moments of when it is challenging, when it is hard, when it is uncomfortable, and really being able to like have maybe that awareness to like pause and like understand like, hey, this is a really good opportunity, despite how hard it is or how stressful this is or whatever. This is a really unique opportunity that I have here, and I think once you can shift your perspective towards, it being an opportunity and not many people maybe get to pursue this or whatever. Right. I mean, and maybe that's not always healthy to compare what other people may or may not get to do, but being able to understand maybe that the gravity of the opportunity you have, right, and that, hey, this is what it's all about, right? But yeah, goals certainly provide us with direction and that direction that we need to make sure that we're leaving no stone unturned to accomplish that goal. But I think sometimes on the way to accomplish a goal, there could be a lot of unexpected things that we learn that may again change our path. So and those are the kind of things that those are really seminal moments in life, right? Because if you learn something new that maybe is unexpected, that you may consider making a pretty life altering decision, or whether that's changing a job or a relationship or whatever, or those are things that can may really make you learn a lot about who you are, right? And force you to introspect in a way that maybe no other thing could. So and I view that with wrestling all the time, right? Like how many times I can't tell you how many times I've had a goal for myself set out I'm just plugging my thing in my iPad in the charger here because it's about to die on me. But I can't tell you how many times we had or I've had a goal, right, in wrestling, didn't accomplish it, didn't accomplish winning a tournament or, placing it or qualifying for the national tournament or whatever, right? Didn't accomplish that. But what I learned through that path, is about, it's really not about, it is really not about what you win and lose. It's really about, who you are as a person and your character. Again, that I know for some that may sound like a sound bite and you're a sanctimonious way of thinking about it, but it really is. That's really all that, that really carries real weight, So so those are things that was able to learn through that process, where I had to introspect, maybe after not accomplishing a goal or whatever, or maybe if I did accomplish a goal and then I realized, hey, some of the best parts of that process were relationships, or the maybe the lonely workouts or work nights, whatever, right? So those are some of the things that kind of make you appreciate that the accomplishment of that goal or a little bit more. So so I think that there at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that heighten your awareness to maybe what's really important, and I'll plug back to that coaching development organization, What Drives Winning. I actually was recently listening to a podcast on him working with Gonzaga's men's basketball team. They're in the national finals, really good basketball team, right? And people know it's become kind of a popular thing that has been promoted for them because they've been so successful, is that their strength coach does a kind of like a little workshop with them on Mondays called Personal Growth Mondays, right? And he does like this team facilitation, and they talk about a lot of different topics. But anyway, in that podcast, he talked about how, and I told you he interviewed a lot of coaches, how he was able to find kind of this trend on elite coaches and national championship coaches. Is like, okay, a coach finally, high power program, a coach gets hired and it's his first head coaching job, and they're just hungry to win a national title, right? And sometimes winning a national title for some of these high power programs could be Power 5 programs, right? Could be a 10 or 20 year endeavor, right? Like it could take 10, 15, 20 years to, actually win. And a lot of them, once they do, they're able to really more accurately assess what they had to sacrifice for that national championship. And once they are able to kind of accurately assess that, and you learn these through these interviews, is like they sacrifice so much of life for that, outcome, like they, maybe they didn't spend enough time with their kids or their wife, or, they didn't see enough things around their periphery enough, while they were going through that. Right. And once they accomplish that, they're like, man, like there's kind of, they always say that, right? Like there's always that empty feeling, right? Like what kind of creates that? Because at the end of the day, once you win a national, again, I've never won a national title as a wrestler or coach. I just want to make that clear. But from all the evidence that I've read and heard is from these coaches that have won these things, right? Is like, you still have to go back to work the next day. You still have to go back to the, to the gym or the restroom or whatever the next day. And at the end of the day, like it's always about, the work, right? It's always about the people, because that's what you always go back to, right? Is the work of the people. So, because after you win a national title, or you accomplish something big, it's not like you never go back to, continuing what you were doing to get there, right? You're always going to be kind of engaged in that day to day. So that's kind of what, I've learned is trying to fall in love with that day to day, even when it's hard. Again, no expert by that on any means, but it's something that I try to remind myself of, as much as possible, so that I can make sure that I understand, because it's crazy to think about. All right, I'm already wrapping up year 4 as a college coach, and if I, it's kind of flown by. 4 years is not a long time, I get it, but it also, in some respects, was a really concentrated 4 years with a lot of experiences thrown in there, a lot of relationships built, a lot of lessons learned. So it's always important to kind of make sure you're assessing that and being aware of what's really important.
Right. I'm so worried that someone might hear that explanation and there is this thin veneer between the cliche self-help, like, just like be present, and then like you're happy forever, and that's all you need to know. But it goes back to qualitative versus quantitative thinking, and it is frustrating in some ways that we call these qualitative things like being present or whatever, building your identity around what I'll call anti-fragile things, that these, albeit not tangible things, they're very important, right? So, and in my own effort to make it more tangible, there's a certain tournament that I remember where I'm fairly certain this was your senior year and my sophomore year, where it was the MAC tournament, which is our conference tournament for Wilkes. Yep. So it's the last in-season tournament of the year most of the time before postseason, where you go into regionals and if you qualify to nationals. So we were at the MAC tournament, and I lost my first match, go down to Conci round, and lost to a person who I had previously majored early in the year. So I took it really hard. I always take losing pretty hard, especially at that point in time, but nonetheless took it very hard. And that's a one-day tournament, but so must have been visibly not thrilled with myself throughout the day. And you had to, compete in your own right. And we get home late that night from Messiah, get back at Wilkes, and we're in the locker room. And after we kind of break it down as a team, and people are kind of dropping their gear off and whatnot, I remember you were kind enough to pull me aside in the locker room, and it turned into a very long conversation that reflected a lot of what you're talking about now. That sure, while these goals in the context of this conversation with wrestling it's good to have these aims, but so much more importantly than that is not only just the experiences, but the character you're developing right now, that if you let it, and clearly you are, if you're putting in all this work and trying to keep making the next right decision over and over and over again for this stream of millions of decisions, right, you're going to become a much better person, whether or not you reach your concrete goals or not. And your explanation of that then, I think, if not single-handedly, it had a very big role in how I did the rest of that season. And look, it wasn't phenomenal. And in hindsight, it was our last tournament, but we had several more matches after that. We had like a quad duel or something like that, and then maybe one or two duels after. And I didn't have a ton of matches afterwards. I believe my sophomore year, I would have been behind our friend Nick Racanelli at Seven, if I remember correctly, who went on to qualify for nationals that year. So I would not go on to have a postseason, but for the rest of that year, if I remember correctly, of the remaining, I don't know, no more than 4 matches, but maybe as little as 2 or 3 matches, I had won convincingly, not over high quality, meaning all-American guys, but I felt like because of that conversation we had, it got me to start thinking in a way where I was far less attached to the result. And I was all right, I'm just going to I could have already strongman the argument of I know what's best if I just go out there and open up. I don't care about winning or losing, right. But I needed to experience a very low trough or series of troughs that year that kind of culminated with having a long conversation with you in the locker room after going 0-2 at the MAC tournament. Not the most highest caliber college wrestling tournament in the world. So to go 0-2 at that is pretty frustrating. And to have that conversation with you, I think was a very large reason for what finally got me to open up, which is wrestling lexicon for going out and not competing with a fear of failure, keeping you from, in wrestling's, context, you're taking shots, you're putting yourself in scoring opportunities, regardless of the risks that you might get scored on or might lose in front of your family and fans and what have you. I feel like that conversation was kind of the precipice for me.
No, that's awesome to hear. And I do, I remember that conversation vividly, and I remember that day. I remember what sparked, my thought of wanting to pull you aside. I remember you had you had wrestled, and you didn't have the outcome you wanted, and I remember you had got off the mat and you went behind one of the bleachers, and you started just shadow wrestling, right, like aggressively and for a long time, and this was like right after you got off the mat, right? Like you didn't eat or anything like that. You just right off the mat, straps off, no shirt, just shadow wrestling, and I had been there, and I knew what you were. I obviously don't know what you were thinking, but I had a sense of what was going on in your head, and how hard you were being on yourself, and the expectation you had for yourself, and just the sheer uneasiness you felt, right, because of that loss, and how you were like, all right, like this shadow wrestling is, I'm going to work really hard. And almost in some respects is like a punitive measure for yourself, right? You're almost like punishing yourself for losing a match, and so it's like, all right, I'm going to shadow wrestle till I can't anymore, so that I can, make sure I don't lose again. And again, I think the idea of maybe putting in more work and doing it diligent, like I don't think there's anything wrong with what you did. I just think that sometimes the thoughts that could spark that action need to be examined, right, and need to be looked at, because I think when we're hard on ourselves for not achieving an outcome, I think it could be productive, but I also could think it could be maybe a thought pattern, a negative thought pattern that could kind of exacerbate itself if we let it. So, and so that's why I thought that it would have been good to have that conversation, and to this day, I remember it vividly, and and I remember your growth through that year, the rest of that year, like you just were able to kind of let it fly more, be loose, and not be so timid about the outcome. And again, this is coach speak, but it's so true. You can't control the outcome. You can't control the outcome of a wrestling match, right? You can only control, how crisp your shots are, how engaged and focused you are on the match, how well you can execute your game plan, right? Those are things that we can control. And again, it's coach speak, and I hear it all the time. Sometimes I cringe at saying it myself, just because it's so it's so widely used in like sport culture and in contemporary terms with everything. But it is very true. This kind of fundamental idea of like controlling what you can control, and not kind of ruminating on the outcome, because it really is not in our control, and outcomes come and go, right? Like you said, like you've been in situations where you've lost to a kid, and maybe a couple weeks later or a couple months later or the next season, you wrestle that same kid and you beat him, and so that's why outcomes are hard to outcomes are not always productive to rest our worth on, because you can make some little adjustments, and maybe you make some little adjustments in the way you train and the way you eat and the way you sleep, and boom, that outcome's reversed. But I think where the outcomes are valuable is maybe you don't change things or adjust things because you want a match, right? And that's not to say that you always need to change things because you lose, right? I think there's value in, okay, we lost a dual meet in November. That doesn't mean that we're going to change up what we're doing because we lost, one or two or even three dual meets for that matter, right? Sometimes it's sticking to a game plan. We have a long-term plan for the course of the season. This periodization comes into play and all these different things, and we're gonna stick to our plan, even if it's met with a little bit of resistance, and stick to it. So, but again, I think that stemmed more from this idea of, again, just making sure we're not measuring our self-worth on winning and losing, and one of the things that, again, we have a lot of sports like people here at Springfield, and we're able to be around a lot of, research-driven approaches to coaching and educating. And a lot of it too is, how can we develop emotional composure, in our athletes, right? That's something that's really controllable. And and I do think that it is kind of like a fundamental pillar for performing at a high level is if you could have especially in a sport like wrestling, where there's so many things that can drive your emotions up the wall, like getting taken down, or maybe you have a bad weight cut. You know, maybe you there's a bad call that happens in a match. You know, whatever it is, right? Like there's so many things that can make you so emotional in the heat of battle in a wrestling match. Like, how can you train that muscle to be more, you know, that I guess proverbial muscle to be more emotionally composed, you know? So, so those are things that, you know, if you can foster that, that'll trickle into every other area of your life, right? Like you look at in everything, right? Professional relationships, personal relationships, you know, work that you're doing. There's so many things that can make us emotional, right? And but if we develop this kind of, you know, awareness and patience to know, you know, one, what we can control, you know, how can we stay composed when things are, you know, difficult. You know, those can lead to better decision making and clearer thought patterns and all that, right? So, so that's kind of how I view maybe why it's so important to maybe that we had that conversation at least now, you know, and looking back at it now, it's like there's a lot of things that that I didn't know at the time, but that I'm saying now that I didn't necessarily maybe know at the time, but I had a grasp on, but maybe not a full understanding of it. But I knew enough, and you knew enough to understand that, you know, we both had something that we were wired, you know, something in our head was wired a little bit differently, where we had to, you know, disrupt that way of thinking.
Right. And, you know, I'll forever be indebted for you for that conversation. Seriously, as across my 6 years now at Wilkes University, I'm sure one of the more important conversations I'll ever have, and probably in this lifetime for sure. That said, we're coming up on, I don't know when we started rolling, but we've been chatting for over 2 hours now. So I would love for this to be part one of however many parts in the future, whenever I can steal you again for more conversations. There's so much we didn't get to, whether it's from, I know that you have your own experience on a podcast now, and you've gotten some fascinating guests on. I didn't even get to touch on those guys yet, and all of our other philosophical musings that I know we could just go on and on about, whether it's talking about good versus bad people or fate versus free will. We could talk for, you know, at length about these crazy things. But nonetheless, as we kind of wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to plug anything you want to plug, whether it's your podcast or program or whatever. The table's yours.
Yeah, but no, Cole, thank you. I appreciate that. So we did start a podcast, and kind of, you know, I think everyone in some capacity in COVID maybe started something new that maybe they didn't do before, had on their bucket list but never got to do. So one of that, you know, for us in our program was, you know, doing a podcast, and you know, we're on. So it's, you know, it's called the Springfield Wrestling Pridecast because we are the Springfield Wrestling Pride. And so we kind of took a play on the words there and made it the Springfield Wrestling Pridecast. So we're on YouTube, Spotify, you know, Apple Podcasts, and Anchor, obviously. It's a Springfield Wrestling Podcast. You can look us up. We have, you know, a lot of great interviews, and well, a lot of great guests. I don't know if they're great interviews, right? But they're great guests. So, you know, we've interviewed everyone from, you know, Hall of Fame coaches to, you know, our strength coach who won National Strength Conditioning Coach of the Year, the National Championship coach, Charlie Sullivan, you know, alumni, you know, a lot, and a professional strongman who's a Springfield alum. His name is Rob Kearney. He's actually the first openly gay professional strongman, so has a really unique story. And he's like on that ladder with like Hafthor Bjornsson. Like he finished like, I think it was like top 5 or top 10 in one of the world's strongest man competitions, you know. So so just a lot of, you know, we tried to diversify the guests, and hopefully we'll have some more coming soon. And then you could, follow me on Instagram if you want, or Twitter, just my first and last name, Pankil Chander. So, but no, Cole, I appreciate you having me on, brother. It was fun.
I appreciate you, dude. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, everyone. Until next time. Adios. All right, everyone. Thank you all for tuning in. Please track us down on social media. Our Facebook is Insights of All Trades. Our Instagram is at Insights of All Trades. Our Twitter is at IOAT Podcast. And you can find us on Gmail. It is insightsofalltrades@gmail.com. So please just send us in your insights. It would mean a lot to us and a lot to everyone else. Meaning, send in any tips or tricks you've learned through your trade or your passion that you think everyone would benefit from knowing. So until next time, adios.